entertaining for the chat. But let's get some GGs in the chat, maybe some Papega Blade emotes, you know, that'd be cool. But yeah, Nico wins the first series. He's gonna be coming back.
Hello and welcome back, guys. Today we will look into a 1v1 tier list for Lost Ark. After I played pretty well in the last 1v1 invitational, I thought it would be a good idea to give you guys a little bit of insight of which classes are good or bad. Just a quick disclaimer before we start though. The game is has a very complex combat style, and any class can win 1v1 matches or PvP matches in general. It's just about how much of a handicap do you want to give yourself. Okay, so we will just start with one base class after another so it doesn't get too repetitive. And we'll just start with the Gunslinger. Straight off the bat is an S tier. Top tier 1v1 class, has more abilities than most other classes. Keep that in mind because obviously Gunslinger has weapon swaps just like Deadeye and Lancemaster, but we don't have that one on release, but we'll talk about that later anyway. So we'll start with only the base classes. Maybe I should preface that. We'll just start with the classes we actually have on launch. As you can see, the other classes also have different icons, so we will talk about those at the very end of the video. So yeah, Gunslinger has more abilities than most other classes, great range pressure, great mobility, and also good super armors that keep her alive longer. The only problem is if you do get caught as a Gunslinger, you will eat a lot of damage. She can't really challenge people in melee range as much as Deadeye can. I'll talk about that one in a second as well. But yeah, Gunslinger, solid S tier. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, next up will be Paladin. I will just put him right into the B tier, which I think will be the lowest tier on this tier list. I don't think we'll fill out the C one. And there's two major reasons for this. Maybe you've watched the recent 1v1 tournament that I mentioned before. Paladin just does not have a whole lot of damage in 1v1. So that means in a lot of situations, if you do want to win with Paladin, that means you will have to put effort into surviving, outlasting your opponent, playing the time game instead of actually killing them, which is not super fun to do. And on top of that, obviously this is a support class, so a lot of your team utility is lost in 1v1 obviously, and that means this class will definitely be one of the worst ones in the game for 1v1. But as I said before, you can still win with this class, and on top of that, it does very well in 3 versus 3, but we'll get into that in the next video. So let's get into the assassins now, which we only have 2 of at the moment, which first one is Deathblade. And Deathblade is an amazing class on our launch because, as you can see, a lot of these blue border classes that you can see here will not be on launch, and a lot of those are actually good against Blade. Reaper is good against Blade, Scouter is good against Blade, Summoner has her moments against Blade as well, Destroyer is good against Blade, and Lance does pretty okay against Blade as well, and even Arcana can be a threat. So since all of these classes are not on launch, Deathblade automatically steps up a couple of tiers and will probably be tied for the #1 S tier spot, not the #1 spot overall, but very, very close to Gunslinger, I would say. And depending on which build you play, if you play actually Maelstrom against a lot of Gunslingers, you will do very, very well. You have a lot of damage potential, you cannot be interrupted in your charge abilities in 1v1, and you have a lot of super armors to trade with, like Deathblade. Deathblade's only downside really is being outlasted. And that means if you play in one of the bigger maps, if you didn't know, in 1v1 there's 2 different map sizes or 2 different map types. The one that is very big, classes like Gunslinger or Deadeye or Sharpshooter can actually just run away from you and you can't really catch up to them. So overall, again, Blade is amazing. I would consider it very, very high tier here. I think they're both Gunslinger and Deathblade will be very close depending on the matchups. Now let's get into the fighters. We will start with War Dancer. Keep in mind, War Dancer and Striker are very similar concepts, but still very different classes. So I will put War Dancer in A tier, and she will probably stay at the very bottom of this when we get to the end of the video, because War Dancer's team utility is obviously not being used in a 1v1 scenario. On top of that, she does not have any super armors or any good super armors that she can use for 1v1. So if someone runs her down, although that's kind of hard because War Dancer is pretty fast, but it does happen and she will be overwhelmed by that. And I think we will just talk about Striker immediately because in this scenario, they are very close. And I will put Striker slightly above War Dancer in 1v1, especially because he just has a super armor in the Tiger Dash that the War Dancer just doesn't have access to. And also he doesn't lose team utility because he doesn't really have a whole lot in comparison to War Dancer, at least. So a Striker I would rank slightly higher than War Dancer here. Can be very interesting actually to play, and the super armor can chase people down very, very quickly and easily, and people don't really, you know, pay attention too much to that. So I think Striker is definitely a little bit higher than War Dancer. Now to the two mages that we have. We'll start with the Sorceress, and we'll put the Sorceress probably lowest S or highest A tier. Sorceress is actually incredibly good at kiting. Once you build up some identity meter, she has more dashes than most melee classes. That being said though, she first of all has to build that identity meter, right? I think Sorceress has a lot of potential in 1v1. It's also not very developed yet because most regions just got Sorceress, especially Russia, where I play most of the time. So I think that will be interesting to see what people come up with. But Sork is a very solid pick for 1v1, and obviously the only real mage that we currently have, so can definitely outsmart and outplay a lot of the other classes. Okay, let's wrap it back up to Sharpshooter, and Sharpshooter is also around the similar level of Gunslinger and Blade, although I would say maybe slightly below them. That has a couple of reasons. First of all, Sharpshooter lacks low cooldowns, and that is an issue in 1v1 because obviously if you have an opponent that can actually run you down, like a Striker for example, you will eventually run out of defensive options, and there's not a whole lot that you can do about that. Sharpshooter has some very, very strong 1v1 build setups with Darkness Arrow, Mines, and all other kinds of gimmicks, which makes this class actually quite a threat in this setup. And obviously the damage potential of Snipe and your range ability is also quite high. You do need a little bit of RNG though, because crit does matter for Sharpshooter a lot, but overall this class is very good in 1v1 and can beat anyone really if you play it correctly. It's, as I said, if you play around your cooldowns, this class can be really, really strong. And one last thing for Sharpshooter, it also depends on which map you're playing, obviously, because the bigger map is obviously better normally for this class because you can just run away further and you can kite for longer. Okay, let's talk about Berserker next, and that may be the lowest rated full DPS that we have, on launch at least, and that has a couple of reasons. Number one, it's a very linear class, so once you understand what this class does, it's easy to avoid most of the time. They have some fairly quick engages though, so don't let that fool you, but Berserker struggles if he doesn't have a proper support structure behind him. He's almost like a hyper carry in other games like League of Legends or something, and in that vein it's kind of hard for him to get into fights. Like actually fighting a Sharpshooter as Berserker, if the Sharpshooter knows what he's doing, is almost impossible alone. And on the other hand though, if the Berserker had like a Bard on his side, the Sharpshooter would just get ran over, right? So in that sense, Berserker as a solo 1v1 class will not be as strong, or won't have as much outplay potential as some other classes have, but at the same time, the damage potential of Berserker cannot be underestimated. There's a lot of damage coming out. If you blink once, if you not pay attention once, Berserker can absolutely destroy you. Now for the last assassin, which is Shadowhunter. This one is a tricky one because it does depend on matchup a lot, but I also think Shadowhunter is performing quite well in most cases and has a lot of different utility. The biggest downside to this class is probably that lack of super armor. There are some builds in 1v1 that use one super armor though in Spinning Dive, so it depends really what setup you're playing and what you're trying to do, but it has a lot of good combos, good mobility, and as I said, the biggest downside is probably the lack of super armor. And there's one more, and that is the ultimate of Shadowhunter is actually pretty horrible in most cases. In 1v1 you can almost never hit it, and if you do hit it, then your opponent made a big mistake. And also the transformation mode for Shadowhunters is just not very useful in 1v1s. So I would probably put Shadowhunter either at the lowest S tier or the highest A tier. We'll just keep it at the highest A tier for now. We take a look at this entire thing again at the end. Next up is Scrapper or Infighter beforehand. And this class was used to be a very, very big threat in 1v1 back in the day. But they changed how the CC works a little bit, and especially how the CC works after you roll out of a combo. And Scrapper can't really make use of the really nice dash stun anymore. At least not as much as she wanted to or as she used to. But with that being said, I would still put her around the same level as Striker. She can outplay a lot and doesn't really get interrupted in 1v1, so she can opt into tripods that actually increase her damage instead of protecting her in combos, meaning that the damage output of this class is actually wild. Also, the ultimate one-shot combo is just as impressive. So very scary class to play against. The double dash enables Scrapper also to outplay classes like Sharpshooter or Sorceress very, very well that have multiple hard CCs, and overall a very solid pick. If you want to play a class that is very precise in its approach, then I would say Scrapper is for you. Now for the last release, Mage, and I mean this is not really a surprise to anyone at this point. I think Bard is a support class, and at the end of the day that's just not really enough damage to really kill people in 1v1. Now, I say that, but there's also a couple of very cheesy specialty-based Bard builds or specialization, which can make this class super annoying to play against in 1v1, but overall it just doesn't really make the cut. It has a similar problem to Paladin. Overall, actually, Paladin does more damage than Bard, so in that scenario, Paladin is slightly better, but Bard is doing okay, I guess. It's more of an annoyance than it is really a strong class. And with that being said, Bard will probably make the bottom of today's list. Don't let that discourage you though. The 3v3-1 Bard will be in a very different spot. Now, we will continue with the Gunners, and the next one is Artillerist. And Artillerist is actually very annoying to play against, especially on the highest level. The only problem is that this class struggles with people that know how to play against it. And I say that by saying, like, in a lot of situations, the guns, the artillerist's like Gatling gun, which starts the entire one-shot combo, isn't very useful if your opponent knows what he's doing. I'll probably put Artillerist A and our Shadowhunter S. I think Shadowhunter does slightly better. Artillerist is a one-trick pony, and that's the same in 1v1 and in 3v3. The only good thing here is that you can't be interrupted in your combo, right? Because there's obviously no other opponents. So if you do hit one of your openers, this class can chunk your HP from like 100% to 30-40% in one combo, and that is something that you should always keep a lookout for. So the moment you don't pay attention for a second, Artillerist will get you and completely annihilate your entire HP bar. Next up is Deadeye. Well, that wasn't a surprise to anyone that actually plays 1v1, but Deadeye is easily the #1 spot on this 1v1 tier list. This class allows you to actually challenge melee classes with their protected knockup in melee range, which Gunslinger obviously does not have. Again, this matters a little, like the map size matters a little bit here, but overall Deadeye, just like Gunslinger, has a lot of pressure, has a lot of buttons, does not run out of mana or anything like that, and will always have a tool to counter their opponent. A lot of their combos are also incredibly powerful, a lot of damage, and both of his ultimates are also very useful. And actually maybe I can also say that to Gunslinger as well, especially the 1v1, you know, high noon ultimate Gunslinger has is also super strong. So both of these classes, while they're basically the same, you know, baseline concept, Deadeye has a little bit better tools at challenging opponents in 1v1, and that makes Deadeye the #1 1v1 class. And Gunlancer. Gunlancer, for now, I will put at the highest A tier, mainly because it doesn't have as much damage as some other of these DPS classes, but it does have good burst combos, higher than both Paladin and Bard, although it's still considered more of a supporty class. But it can opt into more 1v1 centric builds that actually do damage. And also on top of that, both of his ultimates are quite useful in 1v1 and chunk your opponents down as well. So Gunlancer, very protected, very tanky, good mobility still, one of the best, if not the best dodge in the entire game, and can actually be very annoying, especially to other melee classes. So I would consider Gunlancer one of the stronger picks for sure, and as I said, I think Gunlancer will probably be either highest A or lowest S, but the lowest S tier I would probably put Shadowhunter after all, and we'll put Soulfist a little bit higher than that. Soulfist loses her, you know, team-wide damage reduction buff, well, utility, although she can obviously still apply it to herself. But at the same time, she does have a very threatening one-shot combo, or, well, burst combo engage, which a lot of classes can't really deal with. She can peel for herself, she can move herself. She doesn't really need other teammates to peel for her, especially not in 1v1 obviously. So Soulfist, again, one of the best burst classes in the game. There's two downsides though. Number one, the outside of your hype burst windows, the class is quite slow and predictable, so you can get caught off guard for sure. And the second one, both of her ultimates are not very good for 1v1s, but again, as I said, her entire base kit in those hype moments is very, very strong. And you should also keep in mind that really good Soulfists don't really blow their load at the very beginning, so they will use hype 2 and then go into hype 3 later on to have the most burst potential at all times. So if played correctly, Soulfist is a very, very strong S tier pick, slightly above Shadowhunter, and I think there's really nothing you can say about that. So now that we've talked about all of the release classes, let's talk about the unreleased ones really quick. We'll just go through them, so if you watch this video when actually one of those classes is released, you kind of know what you're getting yourself into. So first is Reaper, and honestly Reaper will probably be in the same territory as Deadeye. That's how strong it is in 1v1. It's super fast, super unpredictable, has a good amount of hard CCs, stealth, a good 1v1 ultimate, which also puts her in stealth, and it's just a threat. And she also doesn't have mana problems whatsoever because she doesn't have any. So this class can really put on the pressure with no real downside, and is very hard to catch at the same time. Obviously, just like Deadeye, if you do catch a Reaper, they will die. They're very low health pool, but overall, Reaper will be in the same territory as Deadeye. Super strong, super hard to deal with. Scouter, I will put somewhere in the same level as Sorceress, maybe slightly above, because you do have some self-shielding. Scouter is actually one of the best classes ever in any scenario in this game, it feels like, because they have tools for every situation. They have a little drone that you can't even attack. So your hitbox and your hurtbox are basically disconnected for some of your abilities, which is, if you ever played fighting games or anything like that, is a super strong tool to have. Scouter overall, as I said, has a lot of range pressure, has good strong combos, and does not have to overcommit ever. So the class is a solid S tier, and you cannot really go wrong with it. Next up is Summoner, and I would also say Summoner is in the same universe as Sorceress and Scouter. I would put it a little bit lower just because in 1v1 Summoner lacks mobility, and against a lot of these fast classes it is a big problem because no one will peel for you obviously in a 1v1 game. So I would put her slightly below Sork, maybe even slightly below Soulfist. I think this could be seen either way. The biggest problem with Summoner is actually that she has a lot of damage that you can't really avoid as an opponent. So there's a lot of pets going around. There's a lot of damage just applied to your opponent without you really doing that much. You don't really have to focus on combos that much. There's a lot of damage coming out even without that. But if you do hit some combos, this class hits like a truck. So Summoner, a great pick again. Very different playstyle though to most classes. Now Arcana. Now this one is interesting because depending on the matchup, this class could be at the very top, but it could also be lower at like some A tier here. So I will put her slightly above Sharpshooter, or like around Sharpshooter level as well. She has a very insane 1v1 build that can chunk your entire HP if she has the right card. So if you didn't know, Arcana has different cards, and that is basically RNG dependent which cards you're getting and you're activating. If she gets the so-called death card in that anti-gravity build that I just talked about, she can actually one-shot combo you, and no other class can really do that. She's very hard to deal with. One of the best classes in 1v1 for sure, around the same level as Sharpshooter and the Blade, I would say. So I'll just put her here for now. Two more classes left. Destroyer. First of all, Destroyer is actually not that great here. I will probably put him around this level. Very matchup dependent. If you get matched against a Sharpshooter or a Scouter or a Sorceress, you can't really play the game. So this class is very matchup dependent and very slow, obviously. So in that scenario, I don't think Destroyer will do very well in 1v1 and hasn't really done that so far. Normally, Destroyer could be used as a counter pick, but obviously you can't really change your classes in the middle of a 1v1 anyways. So Destroyer, a solid A tier, maybe a little bit lower even than striker, probably here, and I think I'll leave it at that. And last but not least, Lance Master, one of the best classes in the entire game in general. 1v1 though, I think there's a couple classes that do slightly better than her. I'll put her around the same level as Scouter. She does have a lot of potential, but she does struggle against, well, anti-melee classes like Reaper and Blade a little bit. She does have a great parry, great engages, fast, a lot of buttons, doesn't really run out of cooldowns that often, and has very strong 1v1 builds as well. Lancemaster, depending on the matchup, could go either way. I think we'll put her slightly above Sharpshooters, close to Arcana here. Very strong class, and you can't really go wrong with that either. And that being said, that is everything for today. I think this tier list looks pretty good. I don't think we have to change anything anymore. This is the final version. If you want to make your own tier list like this, I'll leave a link below to this tier list maker as well, so you can maybe, you know, make some for your friends or something. If you have more detailed questions, obviously I didn't really go over each class in super detailed specifics. So if you have more detailed questions, you can always come over to Twitch and ask me questions there, or just ask them in the comments below. I will probably answer them as well. So yeah, thanks for tuning in. The next one will be the 3v3 tier list, which should be out in a couple days as well. If this video was helpful to you, consider subscribing, helps me out a lot. And that being said, thank you guys for tuning in, and see you in the next one. Peace.